I think that we need all types of organizations in the impact space. So I don't think that we should sort of create this notion that only scalable NGOs should exist and others should not. And I think people, at different stages in their lives want to start an organization to create value for other people. And I think rather than judge them, we should just create a large canvas where all organizations exist. There are lifestyle mainstream entrepreneurs and there are NGOs that want to do small work. So I think the question is, what do you want to create? And if you don't want to do scale, I think it should be perfectly okay. Just you have to figure out who funds that non-scale work. It's largely friends and family, and then you find the financial model that works for you, right? But if you want to do scale, I think it's important to separate when you're an early stage organization, a dwarf and a baby. And this is something Manish Sabharwal said. There are organizations that will always stay as a dwarf. They will never grow. For 10 years later, they'll probably be the same size. And then there are babies, which are 5 people now, but they're 500 people in about 5 years, And to know that you are designing for a baby and not a dwarf, I think is very, very important. And when you do that, I think a few things are very critical. One is, are you constantly looking at a way of the intervention that you're working on to be codified in a way where you know that you can replicate it very, very quickly, right? And it's very important when I say this to start by not doing this from day one. Which is what I said earlier, which is moving from problem to idea to solution is most important. A solution to organization where codification happens, right? But once you know that the solution adds value, then you find ways to sort of codify it, capture it in a way where it's replicable, where you can remove your entire ops team, give another ops team, and they will be able to deliver that solution. I think then building for codification, I think, is one step in designing for scale. Second step is to attract fantastic talent and empowering them to solve problems. Most organizations don't scale because the founder has an ego that doesn't fit into a lift, right? And that's an issue. And then anyone who comes in is 3 levels below, none of whom is able to take the organization to the next level, and the founder is sort of reaching their limit and capacity on how far they can scale. And I think it's important to make sure that we are able to attract talent and who we are treating as equals to be able to grow an organization. I think that's extremely critical. And I think third is to really take a market-based approach towards attracting and funding talent, attracting funding, and building enduring relationships with strategic donors. So you at all times are seeing how can you engage with the ecosystem, different types of funders, how do you sort of capture and categorize your funders, how much time that the entrepreneur is spending in raising money, I think is going to be important. There's a lot of NGOs that sort of step back and say that the funding landscape is broken. Every startup is working in a market that is broken, and the role of the entrepreneur is to sort of find a value in a broken market, right? If there was a pot of gold waiting for any organization, imagine the rush we'll have. So when you sort of move away from the market is broken problem to saying I need to figure out the game, I think it becomes easier for you to scale. And if you build that mindset, and again, 3 things, right? Build a codified program. And one of the things that I think all early stage NGOs should remember is that in the initial stages, they're going to fund the person. They're not going to fund an organization, right? Like any startup entrepreneur will tell you, the first 5 customers believed them. They didn't believe the organization. We walk into a room, we demonstrate a certain earnestness to be able to deliver value, and they believe that earnestness and then tell us, hey, listen, we work with it. So one of the things that early stage NGOs should recognize is that social capital precedes financial capital, which is the number of people who know you, who believe you, who trust you, who deeply find you inspiring at some level, is going to result in you getting the money. It's not the fantastic program, it's not the work that you're doing alone, it is really you building social capital. So to raise money for early stage NGOs, it's important for the founder or co-founder, if there's another person in the organization, to take on the mantle of widening their presence in the ecosystem among the people who have the capital and build relationship. And I had somebody who once told me this very useful advice, which is, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money, right? So rather than going and asking people for money and then getting advice, you'd rather ask them for advice and they'll eventually give you the money. So then being open to listening to advice, I think is very important as well. So I think that's number one. I think really just building social capital, I think is very, very critical. Second is to really reduce the transaction friction in raising money. Do you have your metrics in place? Do you have your pitch deck in place? Do you have your narrative structured? Are you iterating your narrative? Are you able to build in the right sort of stories to highlight the impact you're creating? Do you have a model of engaging a donor, saying, hey, come to the field, talk to me, talk to the team, build confidence, and then, over a period of time, they're like, hey, listen, I really like your work. So I'm going to sort of support you. So removing the transaction friction and raising capital, I think, is extremely critical. And the third is a deep understanding of the constraints of the donors that you're working with. Like for example, CSR. I mean, a lot of people talk about it. They're always worried about why are they asking for so much data. You scorn at their interest in putting a brand there or their need to engage the volunteers. I mean, this level of judgment will not pass in any market with any customer. Like, why would you want home delivery? What is this? Type of an argument. So I think respecting and understanding the constraints within which corporates are working, where 5 people are to sign a check for you to receive money, so all the 5 people have to find value, I think brings a lot of benefits as well. And I think the early stage nonprofits build deep understanding of the donor segments they're working with. Individual philanthropists, HNIs, etc., I think will be valued. Sometimes they use this word too broadly and go with a lot of judgment, which I think impedes their work. First lesson I will tell them is don't listen to experts, because entrepreneurs are going to find new value where others have not been able to, and I think they should totally rely on their audacious mindset to sort of do new things. And I think every true entrepreneur I've met, I've always told them their idea won't work, and they've proven me wrong. So I think just not listening to experts for everything and just believing their instinct, I think, is probably the first step, which is ironical at the end of this video, but which is one. I think the second thing that I would definitely say is find a way for the entrepreneur to ground themselves in the reality of the problem we are solving. I think the most difficult thing for an entrepreneur to do is to be constantly aware of the narrative they're selling to the ecosystem around the phenomenal organization that they are, and reconcile with the tremendous difficulties that they're solving for internally. And sometimes it's hard to sort of go into a meeting where you've met a donor and said, we are a great organization and here you have no people to deliver. But grounding yourself in the reality of, okay, this is where I am, how far I am, helps you both not get caught in the narrative that you're building, where you buy your own, narrative, or you don't get into this place where you feel like you're completely broken. Just objectively looking at numbers will be helpful. And I think building that mindset among entrepreneurs will be very, very valuable, because it's a very lonely job to do, to run any organization. And I think while we layer advice over advice, I think just acknowledging the deep sense of loneliness and frustration running organizations and saying, no, I'm going to find the truth for myself and not as a narrative, not as the reality of all the gaps, I think is very, very important to make this work in the long run, because most entrepreneurs burn out. And I think just knowing that this is a long game, I think is comfort. I think that's the second thing. And third is, I think what I said earlier, build an A team. I think the greatest skill you should have is to excite a lot more people to solve the problem that you're solving, rather than somebody recently told me, I've been waiting for so long, no one is coming. Great talent needs a lot of selling more than funders. And I think finding an A team, automatically you build great things. And I think that's